Hey, what's up guys, it's Alex from Fast Fitness Tips here. Today I want to talk to you about carbon sole shoe stiffness. Basically the flexibility in your shoe. Does it make a difference? We've been studying this pretty hard over the last few months and I want to bring you our findings today. I think you'll find it quite interesting and stay tuned to the end because we're going to have a giveaway. My big contention today, however, is that carbon sole shoe stiffness is actually a myth in the sense that a super stiff, super carbon sole doesn't actually improve your power transfer on the bike as much as you would think, if at all, in all honesty. Before we get into that, guys, let's do a little bit of background. Let's talk about shoe design in general. I mean, we all know that a shoe has to be flexible in some circumstances, right? I'm talking there about sneakers, trainers, whatever you want to call them. You know, if you're walking or running, you want the shoe to bend. You want the sole to have some degree of flexibility, and that gives you a much more comfortable run or walk. Now, of course, cycling shoes aren't made like this. They're generally made with stiff soles, some degree of stiffness out of either stiff rubber, nylon, or carbon. And that's useful for cycling because it means, in broad terms, you can press anywhere in the sole and that energy is transferred via the sole to the cleat and the pedal and then cranks. So basically the system is more integrated and mated together. There's not much energy loss in there. And of course, hard-soled shoes, although they're efficient to cycle in, are horribly efficient to walk or run in, as I guess Chris Froome knows to his cost, right guys?
On n'a pas eu l'image, mais ils se sont accrochés très certainement. Une chute, Christopher. Incroyable image du Tour de France 2016. Alors là, on aura tout vu avec Christopher Froome. Il n'a plus de vélo.
So there's a big assumption then that stiffer shoes in cycling mean better performance. I mean, just look at these manufacturers' websites. They're putting out all sorts of stiffness indicators. Here's Shimano. Here's another one from Scott. And here's another one from Gern. They rate their sole stiffness on a 6 to 12 scale. But you know what, guys? Like all things in life, take claims from a manufacturer with a big pinch of salt. Just because it's a 12 or 11, whatever that means, it doesn't mean to say you are super energized by that shoe or that your wattage is going to be that much greater. To really get underneath this, we need to look at the evidence for this claim that a stiffer sole means better cycling. In fact, we asked you guys what you thought about a stiff carbon sole, and it was quite interesting because although 40% were honest and said they didn't know the answer, of those that gave a positive answer, 75% of you said that it improved power transfer. So 3/4 of keen cyclists definitely believe that stiff carbon soles improve your power on the bike compared to a nylon sole. Whether that's true or not, we'll get into that now. So why don't we look at the facts and let's start with the sole flexibility itself. So here at Fast Fitness Tips, we've just done a test of sole flexibility. Here's what we did, guys. We collected 4 shoes from bottom end, let's call that $80, euros or pounds, a rubber sole, obviously fairly flexible, a midsole, let's talk about $100, $120 for a nylon based product, and then a higher end product, I'm talking about $180, $200, a very decent shoe, carbon sole, obviously very stiff out of the box. So we've got these 4 soles, actually 2 grades of rubber, nylon, and then carbon, right? And then we made this stupidly simple jig, let's call it, on the bike, where we simply hung a 5 kilo weight around the heel of the shoe, hold it pretty much fixed, and look for the flexibility, either in the sole, about the kind of flex point, or the degree of tilt in the pedal. You can see it in this video here. So we tested each one in turn. We tried to normalize it by having the same distance weight from the axle, etc. I'm not claiming any great science here, but you can see the difference between the shoes. In other words, the simple, fairly cheap rubber shoes, I mean, they're not rubbish, but they're, at the bottom end of the market, tend to bend under a 5 kilo load around about 15 degrees in my test, let's say. So that's what, 3 degrees per kilogram roughly? And then the nylon shoes bend quite a bit less, around about 6-7 degrees. And then the $200 expensive carbon shoes bend around 5 degrees for a 5 kilogram weight, which is around about 1 degree per kilogram, very roughly. So what we can conclude from this very rough, almost non-scientific test is that there is a definite difference in flex in shoes, in riding shoes, so that the quality of the shoe does count for something. It's not totally made up by the manufacturer. But wait guys, wait, don't jump to any conclusions here, because think about it, a bend isn't necessarily bad unless the flex itself wastes energy. What I'm talking about is wasted energy through, let's say, microscopic heating of the sole or the shoe. Maybe the sole bends but returns the energy back to the rider at some point in their pedal stroke. After all, that's what like the hysteresis loop does in bicycle tires, isn't it? Only a small amount of the energy of the deformation is actually wasted. The vast majority is returned to the system. The same with bicycle frames actually. We now know, like 10 years after the fact, a super stiff frame is not necessarily the best thing because it can be fragile, it can ride really badly. A flexible frame can actually be better for power transfer. For one thing, when the frame flexes, it keeps the wheels going in a perfectly straight line despite you somewhat deviating the bottom bracket. So I guess what we need to do at this point is convert our flex into a chart so we can really see what's going on. So what we can see here from this really simple chart, like bend per kilogram, and if you do want to look it up, there is a more scientific version of this in Journal of Applied Biomechanics. Then the best rubber shoe is deviating quite a lot compared to even a cheap nylon shoe, but a best nylon, cheap carbon and best carbon, although their stiffness ratings are very different according to the manufacturer, the degree of flex or bend is actually much less than you might think, and it's actually quite modest. But even that doesn't tell you the full story. To get the full story, what we need to do is look at kind of energy loss. And yes, this paper has done this, and I've converted it into a chart and normalized it for a 300 watt rider, and actually is a very illuminating graph. Because what you see is that down at the cheap end, although there is energy inefficiency in that bend, it's much less than you would think. Even that cheap rubber shoe with a high power rider, let's say 300 watts, only loses 2 or 3 watts from using a really cheap shoe. And actually anything fairly decent and stiff is in the 1 to 0 watt range, and almost nothing to be gained or lost from best carbon, cheap carbon and best nylon. So what does this mean for your riding? But what it means is you're very unlikely to have a measurable difference or gain in your power by virtue of your shoe sole material. Okay, if you don't believe me, have a look at these scientific studies on this very same topic. Here's a study that took stiff plastic nylon versus super stiff carbon sole and then looked at general or gross efficiency, how much energy was going through compared to the stiffness of the shoe. And there's pretty much no difference between the stiff and the less stiff sole, even though, to be fair, they were both fairly stiff. Okay, still don't believe me, guys? Fine, let's go to an extreme. Forget about your rubber sole or your nylon sole. What about if you wear sneakers, i.e. trainers or jogging shoes? Millions of cyclists actually cycle in trainers, sneakers, jogging shoes every day. It's only like really serious cyclists who get on their bikes and pimp it out and get on their, road or mountain bike shoes with their custom shoes, You know, that's actually, okay, that's me and you, but that's not everyone, okay? So it's worth looking, what is the information, what is the data if you happen to ride in sneakers or trainers or joggers on your bike. And the truth is, it's actually much less difference than you would think. So for example, the gross efficiency or energy that it takes to go between stiff sole, flexible cycling and running shoe is actually much less than you think, as shown by this researcher by Mike Asmussen. Also, the same thing was done by GCN. Did you remember this video? Actually, it was done in July 2017. They looked at the effect of riding with clipless versus flat pedals. But you know what? They also rode between sneakers, as you can see here, and cycling shoes. So not only did they compare flats versus clipless, they compared sneakers and proper cycling shoes. And what was the result? Well, the result in this video was that at lower power, it made very little difference what kind of shoe you were wearing. But what they did find is when they got out of the saddle to sprint, there was a big difference. To be fair, it's not that there's no difference between sneakers and road shoes. It's that it only really comes out when you put a lot of pressure on those pedals. In other words, when your watts are high, then that's when they're really worth their money, if you like. So I guess what I'm saying here is stiffer soles really don't necessarily save you that much at low watts, especially if you're a casual rider. And if you're a leisure cyclist, it's probably okay to use whatever shoe you want. So the question then is, why do we even use carbon soles at all, or really expensive road or mountain bike shoes? And I guess there's a few reasons. And one reason is comfort. Think about it like this. Have you ever ridden a long distance with sneakers or joggers on your road bike, or even with those spiky clipless pedals, but the ones with quills or edges? It gets really painful. I'll tell you a story. I went mountain bike riding in Tenerife up the volcano, and I wore these super flexible trainers. And it turned out that really quickly the edges of the pedal dug into my shoes, and it was really painful. What I did in an emergency is I shoved credit cards between the insole and the sole of the bike, just to give a bit of pressure distribution. And the reason that's important is because, you know, the pressure that's coming through the ball of your foot when you are cycling is really phenomenal. In fact, 50% of the pressure through your foot as a whole goes through your midfoot. Only about 40% goes through the toes, the toe area at the front. Only about 14% goes to the rear, and 14% goes through the heel. Also, when you're pressing on that very small cleat area, the pressure is obviously higher, and the pressure sensation around that point can be very high. But there are other factors as well. I'll concede that weight is an issue, and your shoes will save weight if they've got a really good light sole. And the third is that a shoe with a good carbon sole probably has a good design in general. But we mustn't forget, some of it is just marketing. For example, these stiffness scores seem to show almost no resemblance with any kind of normative data at all. So in summary, guys, what I'm saying today is the idea that it's just a carbon super stiff sole that you need is basically busted from the perspective of power transfer. Although 3/4 of you seem to believe this, it's not really true, because the difference between a best carbon and cheap carbon sole is about 0.2 of a watt, i.e. it's a tiny marginal gain. And I doubt that that's one that you can feel. But talking of feel, you may be able to feel differences in comfort or pressure distribution, and that's completely valid, because if you're on a long ride, it's easy to give up or want to give up because of discomfort, whereas power transfer may be okay. Comfort is also a top priority. So I would say then, buy whichever shoe suits you guys. The stiffer it is doesn't necessarily mean the better it is. Hey, I'm talking about shoes here, right? But seriously, there's a lot more to shoe design than just sole stiffness. Hey guys, I hope that was useful. I promised you a giveaway, and here we have it. It's the Wend Wax Rub-On Chain Additive. It's basically a special wax that you rub onto your chain. It makes your chain more efficient, it makes it cleaner, and obviously it makes it quieter as well. We've got 2 of these to give away. Any comment that you want to put on the comments below, just use the word enter and I'll enter you into the competition. And if a second bonus draw, put a comment on our entry on our Strava site, fft.tips Strava. Put a comment on that and you'll get a bonus entry. So you can potentially win 2 of these. I'll definitely be having 2 draws in about 2 weeks time. And that is mid-November. Alright guys, Wend Wax add-on. We've paid for it ourselves. We're going to send it out to you if you're a winner. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video guys. Take care.